The black void of space stretched endlessly before Admiral Cal Noven's flagship, Elysium, as it drifted through the uncharted sector. The vast emptiness was unsettling. There should have been nothing here, just the remnants of forgotten stars and the cold silence of space. But the distress signal had come, cutting through the static of the void, with coordinates that led directly to this forsaken region. Noven stood on the bridge, staring out at the dark abyss, his mind racing. The transmission was weak, garbled, but it was unmistakable, a plea for help from a galactic coalition of alien species. They were stranded, their fleets shattered, their homeworlds lost to a war that had ravaged the galaxy, and they had nowhere left to turn but Earth. "Admiral," came the voice of Lieutenant Kara Graves, his comms officer, her tone tight with urgency. "We're receiving a transmission from the fleet. It's coming through on all frequencies, but it's almost a scream. The signal's origin is near the coordinates we were given." Noven's heart sank. The message was haunting, a faint echo of desperation and terror. "Please," the alien voices had said, "save us. The darkness is closing in. We are all that remains." Then the transmission cut out abruptly. "How long until we reach their last known position?" Noven asked, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Another 2 hours, sir," Graves replied, her fingers moving rapidly over the control panel. "We're entering an area of space that's never been mapped. There's no record of any habitable worlds or civilizations here. Keep your eyes open, everyone," Noven said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're walking into." As Elysium approached the coordinates, the stars around them began to flicker like candles in a storm. The crew's nerves were frayed. The sector was supposed to be empty, a dead zone, but the signs of life were everywhere. The stars twinkled erratically, and the void seemed alive, full of movement, like the cosmos itself was watching them. Noven felt the weight of every crew member's gaze. This mission wasn't just a rescue operation. It was humanity's chance to prove its place in the galaxy. If Earth failed, these civilizations would be lost forever. Suddenly, the calm of space was shattered. The Elysium rocked violently, and alarms blared across the bridge. "What the hell?" Noven shouted, bracing himself against the controls as another shockwave hit the ship. "Admiral." "We're being hit by some kind of gravitational pulse," Graves reported, her face pale. "It's not registering on any known scanners. It's like it's alive." The Elysium shuddered again, the hull creaking under the strain, and the lights flickered. Noven's stomach lurched as the gravitational field distorted their trajectory, pulling them off course. "Brace for impact," Noven barked. "Full reverse thrust, now." The crew scrambled to regain control as an enormous shadow appeared on the sensor grid. It wasn't a ship. It was too large, too unnatural. The shadow moved swiftly toward them, eclipsing the stars behind it. "Admiral," Graves screamed. "We're not alone." Before Noven could respond, the bridge was plunged into darkness. The backup power flickered on, but it was weak dim, and then, in the silence, a deep, malevolent hum filled the air. The sensation was impossible to describe, a cold, ancient force, something older than the galaxy itself. "We need to move now," Noven shouted. "If we don't get out of here, we'll be torn apart." The Elysium lurched again, this time with such force that Noven was thrown to the floor. His head hit the hard surface of the deck, and for a moment, everything went black. When he came to, the ship was eerily quiet. But the hum was still there, echoing from every corner of the vessel. And then, a voice crackled over the comms, alien, distorted, yet unmistakable. "Human, Earth, you should not have come." The message sent a chill down Noven's spine. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Admiral Cal Noven struggled to his feet, still dizzy from the impact. His head ached, but the urgent voice in his ear snapped him into focus. "Admiral, the ship's integrity is failing." Lieutenant Graves called out, her voice tense. "We're losing power to the secondary thrusters." The grave pulse is interfering with everything. We can't maintain our course. Novin wiped the blood from his lip, his mind racing. He knew that if they didn't regain control soon, Elysium and the entire fleet would be helpless. But as his eyes scanned the bridge, he saw the tension etched into every crew member's face. This was not just some anomaly. They were dealing with something far more dangerous, something alive, something that didn't want them here. Captain Zoran, Novin barked, turning to the tactical officer. Status report on our shields. Can we hold against whatever that was? Zoran, a grizzled veteran, looked up from his console, his face ashen. We're holding for now, sir, but it won't last long. That pulse, it's not like anything we've ever encountered. It's eroding our shields with every second. Understood, Novin muttered, his gaze fixed on the vast blackness outside the viewport. The stars should have been steady, unmoving, but they were flickering now, like distant lights on a broken string. The darkness had started to warp, like a ripple through the fabric of space itself. It was as if the universe itself was trembling. We need to get out of here, he said, more to himself than to anyone in particular. Graves nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm trying to stabilize the engines, Admiral, but the gravitational pulses are growing stronger. If we don't make it out of this sector soon, we'll be pulled into whatever's causing this. Suddenly, the comms crackled again. A new voice, garbled and distant, came through. It was a transmission from the stranded alien fleet, distorted by interference, but unmistakable. Al, do you hear us? This is the final plea. We're trapped. The dark takes us. The message cut off abruptly. It was the same alien coalition that had sent the original distress signal. Novin clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. They were so close to reaching them, but the unknown force threatening them was clearly not going to let them go without a fight. Activate full reverse thrusters, Novin ordered. Take us to the coordinates of that signal. We're not leaving without those survivors. Aye, sir, Graves replied. Her fingers flew across the console, but the engines barely responded. The hum of the failing systems was like a heartbeat, growing weaker with each passing moment. It was clear that the Elysium was barely holding together. Sir, the signal's fading fast, Zoran warned, looking at his screen. The coordinates we were given, they are moving. What? Novin snapped. How is that possible? We've been tracking that signal for days. I don't know, sir, Zoran replied, his face pale. It's as though the very space around them is collapsing. Novin's brow furrowed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The darkness wasn't just a force of nature, it was something engineered, something deliberate. The signals from the alien fleet weren't moving randomly, they were being pulled towards something. The question now was, what was drawing them in? And more importantly, could Earth's forces stop it before it consumed them all? Captain, prepare to engage evasive maneuvers. We need to break through this distortion, Novin commanded. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the Elysium, sending the entire ship into a violent spin. Lights flickered, consoles sparked, and alarms blared. Novin was thrown against the side of the bridge, his vision blurring. We're cut again, Graves said, her voice trembling. It's coming for us. Outside the viewport, something massive loomed in the distance, a shadow, as dark as the void itself, stretching across the stars like a living thing. It was drawing closer with terrifying speed. A cold dread washed over Novin as the shadow split open, revealing the skeletal form of a gargantuan ship. Its hull was jagged, scorched by centuries of cosmic storms. Its silhouette was almost organic, as though it were alive, watching them. From the depths of its darkened interior, a red pulse of light emanated, and the Elysium lurched again, as though it had been caught in a tractor beam. We're not going to make it out of this, Captain Zoran muttered, his voice heavy with the weight of resignation. Whatever that is, it's pulling us in. Novin clenched his fists. The alien fleet had been right all along. Earth wasn't just coming to help, it was walking into a trap. The question now wasn't whether they could escape. It was whether they could survive the darkness long enough to save anyone. "Graves," Novin shouted. "Can you fire the emergency thrusters? We need to break free." "I'll try, sir," she replied, her fingers racing across the console. But before they could act, the comms crackled again, louder this time. The voice was unmistakable, but its tone had changed. The message wasn't a warning anymore. It was a declaration. "Human, Earth, you should not have come. The darkness will consume you, and all that follows." Then, with a blinding flash, the shadow closed in. The blinding flash engulfed the Elysium, a searing burst of energy that caused the ship to groan and shake under the strain. Admiral Cale Novin was thrown to the ground once more, his body crashing against the cold, metal floor of the bridge. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought they were finished, pulled into the maw of whatever ancient entity lurked in the darkness. But then the light receded, leaving only the deep hum of the ship's systems fighting to stay alive. "Admiral." Graves' voice cut through the haze, sharp with panic. "The hull's been breached. Decks 7 through 10 are compromised. We're losing pressure in several sections, the distortion spreading." Novin gritted his teeth and pulled himself to his feet, clutching the edge of the command console to steady himself. The crew was scrambling to contain the damage, but it was clear the Elysium was on the edge of collapse. The massive shadow that had loomed over them was now all but gone, its pulse having swept over them like an invisible wave, leaving nothing but the eerie silence of space. But that silence was deceptive. The ship was still moving, being pulled inexorably toward something. Novin's gaze flicked to the viewport, and his heart sank. The dark shape had disappeared, but it had left its mark on the stars. The sky around them had changed, warped in subtle but terrifying ways. The stars themselves seemed dimmer, their light flickering as if they were gasping for breath. "Report," Novin snapped, his voice commanding despite the chaos around him. "Admiral," Lieutenant Graves said, her voice strained but steady, "we're being pulled toward a singularity. It's not like any black hole I've ever seen. Its gravity is distorting everything in its path. And the worst part, I don't think it's natural. This is something engineered." "Engineered?" Novin echoed, his mind racing. "By whom?" "Not sure, sir, but the signal is stronger now. It's coming from the singularity's core," she replied, eyes scanning her terminal in a frantic blur. "Whatever's causing this, it's alive, and it's communicating with us." A cold shiver ran down Novin's spine. The implications of her words were enough to freeze his blood. Whatever this was, it wasn't a force of nature, it was a weapon. An ancient, terrible weapon designed to break entire fleets, to erase entire civilizations. "The fleet's almost here, sir," Zoran said, his voice full of urgency. "We've managed to send out a distress signal, but if we can't break free from this pull, they'll never make it in time." Novin clenched his fists, his mind spinning. The darkness had already taken so much. He wasn't about to let it take Earth too, not while he still had breath in his body. "Graves, I need you to track the alien fleet. We're going to need their help if we're going to survive this. Can we use the emergency thrusters to break free?" Novin's voice was steady now, filled with cold determination. She looked at him for a long moment, her fingers hesitant on the controls. "I don't know, sir. The distortion's too strong. The thrusters might not be able to cut through the gravity well." "We have to try," Novin said firmly. "Prepare the fleet. We're not going to die here today." A silence settled over the bridge as the crew followed his orders. Despite the overwhelming odds, there was a sense of unity. Earth's forces had come to help, and they wouldn't back down. Novin knew that even in the face of an unknown terror, humanity's strength lay not just in their weapons, but in their unyielding spirit. The dark forces that haunted the galaxy could tear at their bodies, but they would never break their will. "Admiral, the fleet is nearing our location," Zoran called, his eyes flicking back to the tactical screen. They're preparing to enter the sector, but they're facing resistance. The gravitational distortion is messing with their systems too. We don't have much time, Novin said, his gaze hardening. Tell them to brace for impact. We're going in. A deep, foreboding rumble shook the Elysium, and the lights flickered once more, casting long, eerie shadows across the bridge. The voice from earlier, the one that had threatened them, echoed once more, this time clearer, louder. Human, Earth, you will not escape. The sound of its words sent a chill through Novin's chest. It wasn't just a threat. It was a statement of fact. The entity was closing in, and no one, no matter how strong or determined, could stop it alone. But the Elysium wasn't alone. The alien fleet was on its way, and Earth's forces, however battered, would fight. Novin turned to his crew, his eyes burning with resolve. Prepare for a full assault, he ordered. We're going to break this thing open. If we have to die, we die fighting. With that, the battle for survival began in earnest, as Elysium charged toward the heart of the storm, hoping against hope that they could find a way to save themselves, and the galaxy, from the darkness that sought to consume them all. The Elysium shuddered violently, its hull groaning under the increasing pressure as it was drawn ever closer to the heart of the singularity. The gravitational forces were immense, distorting everything around them, the stars, the very fabric of space itself. Novin could feel the ship's systems struggling to maintain stability as they plunged deeper into the abyss. Admiral, the fleet is within range, Zoran called out, his voice tense. But their ships are being pulled in faster than we can predict. We have to move now or risk losing them. Novin's eyes darted to the view screen, where the formation of alien ships was barely visible, caught in the pull of the singularity's gravity. The once proud fleet was now little more than broken fragments, tossed around by forces far beyond their control. Yet they had made the decision to follow Elysium into the unknown, to gamble everything on a single desperate hope, humanity's intervention. We won't leave them behind, Novin said, his voice steady but grim. Prepare to initiate emergency maneuvers. We need to get a clear shot at the core of this thing. Graves, her face pale but focused, adjusted the controls. The thrusters are already at maximum, Admiral. The pulse is too strong. We'll need a direct line to the core to break free from the pull. Then we'll find it, Novin replied. We've faced worse. We can handle this. The crew worked with ruthless efficiency, moving as one to counter the distortion, but Novin couldn't shake the sense that they were racing against a countdown. Every second felt like an eternity, and every move they made was met with resistance. The hum of the singularity grew louder, like 1,000 voices whispering in unison, its pulse so immense it threatened to tear the ship apart. Suddenly, a new transmission crackled through the comms, a distorted voice, unmistakably alien, though still struggling to break through the interference. This is Captain Thaler of the Ophirian fleet. We've lost contact with the rest of our ships. We can't hold on much longer. Graves' hands moved over the controls with a renewed urgency. Admiral, the Ophirian flagship is right on top of us. They're going to be pulled in unless we can cut through this gravity well. Engage them, Novin barked. Coordinate with their fleet. We're not leaving anyone behind. Captain Thaler, prepare your ship for a coordinated burst on my mark. We're taking this fight to the heart of the storm. A moment of silence passed before the strained voice of Captain Thaler came through, filled with reluctant acceptance. We are ready, Earth forces. But I warn you, the closer we get to the core, the more aggressive the forces of the singularity become. Our ships can't take much more. We'll push through it, Novin said, his tone resolute. Just keep your formation tight. We're all in this together now. As the alien fleet closed in behind them, the Elysium began to move toward the center of the distortion, cutting through the waves of gravitational turbulence with desperate speed. But it was like trying to sail through a storm that had no end. The Singularity's pull was relentless, its grip tightening with every passing moment. "Admiral," Graves called, her voice frantic. "The ships are beginning to warp. Their hulls are stretching." "Hold on," Novin shouted. "We can't afford to lose them now." The alien ships, each from a different species, fought valiantly to maintain their formation. Some were twisting uncontrollably, their once pristine hulls contorting under the stress. Novin watched in helpless horror as one of the smaller vessels, a sleek, angular ship from the Andaran race, was torn apart, its pieces scattered into the blackness. Another ship, an Etherian dreadnought, exploded in a blinding flash, consumed by the ever-expanding gravity well. Graves let out a gasp. "The Etherian flagship is breaking apart. They're gone, Admiral." "Damn it," Novin muttered, clenching his fists. "We won't let them die for nothing." The Elysium surged forward, the remaining ships following in its wake. The core of the Singularity loomed ahead, a dark swirling mass at the center of everything. Its power was overwhelming, consuming the very stars in its vicinity, bending the light around it into an unnatural distortion. "Now," Novin shouted. "On my mark, release all emergency thrusters and fire every available weapon at the core." The Elysium's thrusters flared with sudden intensity, the ship's entire frame shuddering under the combined force. The alien fleet, now barely holding together, aligned themselves with Earth's flagship, all weapons targeting the Singularity's center. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, and then the sky exploded. Energy surged from the combined firepower of the ships, lashing out at the dark heart of the Singularity. A deafening roar filled the ship, and the hull creaked under the intensity. The shockwave from the blast was enough to send the fleet into a spiral, throwing everything into chaos. Yet, amid the violent rupture, something strange happened. The Singularity shuddered. The pull weakened, just for an instant, enough for Novin to realize what had happened. "It's working," Graves shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. "The core's destabilizing. It's starting to collapse." Novin allowed himself a brief, relieved breath, but there was no time to savor the victory. "Keep firing," he commanded. "We need to finish this. We've only got one shot." The battle for survival had reached its climax, but as the Elysium and the alien fleet pushed against the darkness, they all knew that even if they survived, the true cost of this encounter would leave its mark forever. The combined barrage of fire from the fleet continued to pound the Singularity's core. The Elysium trembled as each strike sent shockwaves through the ship, the hull creaking as though it were about to be torn apart. Novin could hear the groan of metal, the shudder of the engines fighting to stay operational under the relentless pressure. "Admiral, the gravitational pull is weakening," Graves shouted, her hands flying over the control panels, trying to keep the ship steady. "But it's not enough. We need more power to breach the core." Novin's jaw tightened. They were close, so close to breaking the Singularity's hold, but the cost had been immense. Several of the alien ships had been lost entirely, their hulls disintegrating under the intensity of the gravitational forces. The remaining vessels fought to stay together, but the damage was clear. They had thrown everything into this last, desperate assault. "Focus all remaining power into the main cannons," Novin ordered, his voice firm. "Graves, lock on to the core. This is it." Graves didn't hesitate. She quickly reconfigured the targeting systems, setting the coordinates for the heart of the Singularity. "Aiming, ready to fire on your mark." Novin stared at the viewport. The swirling mass of the Singularity pulsed like a living thing, its dark tendrils reaching out into the void. The energy it was releasing seemed almost sentient, as if it was aware of the attack, pushing back with a force that was too powerful to fully comprehend. But it had been wounded. The cracks were starting to show. "Admiral," Zoran called from the tactical station, his voice sharp. "The remaining ships, they're breaking formation. They're not going to make it. The last few are about to be pulled in completely." Do what you can to help them, Novin said, though he knew there was little they could do now. The Singularity's power had already begun to take its toll, but the alien fleet's sacrifice would not be in vain. They had fought alongside humanity against something far worse than anything they could have imagined. The loss was heavy, but it was a reminder of the stakes. Earth had to survive, and this was their final chance. Graves, on my mark, Novin said, stepping closer to the control panel. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the alien fleet's last ships fall one by one into the depths of the Singularity, swallowed by the darkness. Firing on your command, Admiral, Graves replied, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The crew braced themselves. Every eye was fixed on the viewport, every breath held in anticipation. And then, with a surge of adrenaline, Novin's voice cut through the tension. Now! Graves slammed her palm onto the activation button. The Elysium's weapon systems roared to life, a blinding streak of light shooting from the main cannons, piercing the heart of the Singularity. The energy beam surged forward, crashing into the core with a force that shook the very stars. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow as the beam pierced the blackness, digging deep into the heart of the distortion. Then, an explosion unlike anything Novin had ever witnessed erupted in front of them. A wave of energy pulsed out from the core, sending a ripple through space, causing the stars to flicker as if they were about to blink out of existence. The Singularity itself recoiled, its violent pull momentarily faltering. Status report. Novin barked, his mind racing. He could feel the ship's systems fighting to stay stable as the shockwave from the blast passed over them. Graves was furiously typing on the console. We've destabilized the core, sir, but it's not over yet. The gravitational distortion is still active. It's collapsing, but slowly. We need to get out of here now, Novin ordered. Prepare for emergency warp. I want every ship in this fleet to follow us. We've got to escape the collapse before it pulls us in again. The crew worked quickly, every member moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The Elysium's engines hummed to life as the warp drive powered up. Outside, the remaining ships, their hulls battered and broken, struggled to follow their lead. Some were too far gone to survive. Others were holding on by sheer willpower. But together, they had a chance. As the Elysium shot forward, the Singularity's pull began to weaken further, but the cost was still high. The ship's systems were on the brink of failure, the energy reserves nearly depleted from the extended assault. Yet the warp drive hummed, pulling them away from the collapsing core. The stars outside the viewport blurred into streaks of light, and the Elysium leaped forward into the safety of warp space, narrowly escaping the grasp of the dying Singularity. But as Novin allowed himself a moment of relief, he knew it wasn't over. The galaxy had been forever changed by what they had encountered, and there would be no easy path forward. The forces that had built the Singularity, whatever they were, would come looking for them. This battle had only just begun. Admiral, Graves said, her voice quieter now. We did it, but at what cost? Novin glanced around at the battered crew, his heart heavy with the weight of the losses. At the cost of everything we fought for, but we survived, and that's what matters. As the Elysium and the few remaining ships of the Allied fleet limped toward safety, the echoes of the battle still rang in their ears. The fight for Earth had taken them to the very edge of existence, and now they would have to prepare for the next wave. They had faced the abyss and come out alive, but in the vast, uncharted reaches of space, there were always more shadows lurking, waiting for their chance to strike. The Elysium emerged from warp space into the relative calm of the unknown, its hull battered and its systems flickering from the strain of the battle. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the steady hum of the ship's cooling systems and the occasional beeping of consoles struggling to remain operational. The stars outside the viewport seemed distant and cold, their light a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Novin leaned heavily against the edge of the command chair, his mind still reeling from the enormity of the battle. They had survived the singularity, but the cost was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The Allied fleet, once a symbol of unity between Earth and its newfound allies, was now a shadow of its former strength. The Aetherians, the Andarans, the Palcrians, so many ships lost in a single desperate push. "Admiral," Graves said softly, breaking the silence, "we've calculated the damage. We've lost 60% of our fleet, and the Aetherians have lost even more. What remains of their ships are in no condition to travel. The Andarans are in worse shape. Several ships are barely holding together." Novin nodded grimly, his eyes fixed on the starry expanse ahead. The cost of victory was measured in lives, and the wreckage of the battle was a harsh reminder of that. "Can we make it to the nearest colony station?" "It's a stretch," Graves replied. "The closest is nearly 3 weeks away at current speeds, and with the condition of the ships, it might take even longer. We'll need repairs, supplies, and time." "Time is something we don't have," Novin muttered, rubbing his forehead. "The enemy will come for us. They've been watching, waiting, and they know what we've done. If we don't regroup and reinforce now, we won't last another assault." "We'll have to make do with what we have," Graves said. "But we have to be careful. The damage is extensive. If we encounter another enemy force now, we might not survive." Novin stood up straighter, shaking off the fatigue that threatened to take over. He couldn't afford to let the weight of the loss drag him down. Not now. "I'll contact the remaining leaders. It's time to start rebuilding. But we need to be prepared for whatever comes next." The comms officer, a young human named Xander, interrupted the conversation. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Captain Thaler of the Aetherian fleet." Novin's gaze sharpened. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing Captain Thaler, his normally imposing figure now gaunt and weary. His face was scared from the battle, but his eyes still held the fierce pride of his people. "Admiral Novin," Thaler said, his voice hoarse, We owe you our lives, but I fear we're not out of danger yet." "I don't think any of us are," Novin replied. "The singularity might be gone, but that doesn't mean we're safe. How are your remaining forces?" "Scattered," Thaler admitted. "Many of our ships are too damaged to continue. We've lost contact with several key fleet commanders. The Andarans, they're in worse shape. Their ships, their technology doesn't withstand this kind of assault as well as ours. If they don't get help soon, they'll be wiped out." "We'll send a recovery fleet," Novin said immediately. "We have the resources to help them. But we need to move quickly. I'm ordering a joint council of all the remaining fleets. We need to discuss our next move. Together." Thaler nodded slowly. "A council, yes, but we must be careful. Trust is thin between our people, and after this battle, I doubt the others will be willing to unite so easily. Our enemies know we are vulnerable now." "We don't have the luxury of mistrust," Novin replied. "The enemy will strike soon, and when they do, we need every ally we can get." Thaler hesitated, his gaze flickering to something off-screen. When he returned his attention to Novin, there was a fire in his eyes. "I'll gather what's left of the Aetherian fleet. We will meet you in 3 days at the coordinates you send. But know this, the Palcrians, they are not eager to ally. They have always been self-serving. You'll have to convince them." "I'll do what I can," Novin said, his voice firm. "We all have our reasons for fighting. If we survive this, we'll find a way to work together." With a curt nod, Thaler cut the transmission, and the screen returned to static. Novin stood motionless for a moment, contemplating the difficult path ahead. The fragile alliance they had forged with these alien species was all that stood between them and utter annihilation, but trust would be a hard thing to rebuild. The wounds from this battle were deep, and they would not heal quickly. "Admiral," Graves said, her voice pulling him back to the present. "What now?" Novin turned to face her, determination etched in every line of his face. We rebuild, we fight, and we make sure that when the enemy comes, we are ready. The battle is far from over." As the Elysium continued its slow journey toward the rendezvous point, Novin couldn't help but wonder just how fragile the alliance really was. They had faced the darkness together, but now, as they limped toward a meeting that could either solidify their survival or tear them apart, Novin knew that the real challenge was only just beginning. There were forces at work in the galaxy that no one understood, and only time would tell if humanity and its allies could stand together long enough to defeat the true threat that loomed on the horizon. 3 days passed in a blur of activity as the remaining ships of the Coalition limped toward the designated rendezvous point. Novin spent most of his time in the command center, coordinating repairs, overseeing the preparation of supplies, and strategizing their next steps. But even as they worked tirelessly to stabilize their fleet, an underlying tension lingered in the air. The Palgrians, despite their earlier willingness to fight alongside humanity and the Epherians, remained distant. They had always been a mysterious people, secretive and shrewd, and Novin knew that convincing them to join the council would be a delicate task. Their motives were unclear and their actions unpredictable. Trust was not a currency they freely spent. As the Elysium approached the rendezvous coordinates, Novin's mind was heavy with the weight of the upcoming meeting. They couldn't afford to waste time. The enemy, whatever force had created the singularity, was still out there, watching. Their next move could decide the fate of everything. "Admiral, we're approaching the rendezvous point," Graves reported from the tactical station. "All ships are accounted for, but the Palgrian vessel is lagging behind. No communication from them yet." "They're never on time," Novin muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Send a signal to their flagship. Let them know we're waiting. If they think we're weak after the battle, they'll take advantage of it." Graves hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Aye, sir." Moments later, the screen flickered to life, revealing the sleek, angular shape of the Palgrian flagship. Its dark hull blended into the backdrop of stars, making it almost invisible. The transmission was clear, but there was an air of coldness to the response. "Admiral Novin," came the voice of Palgrian Ambassador Xylith, his tone sharp and almost dismissive. "We have arrived. You may begin the council." Novin's jaw tightened. Xylith had always been one of the more aloof leaders of the Palgrian delegation, but this coldness was a new level. It was clear that the Palgrians did not consider themselves equals in this alliance. They viewed themselves as superior, and perhaps in some ways they were right. Their technological advancements were impressive, and their tactics often unpredictable. But that didn't mean they were above the survival of the galaxy. "Very well, Ambassador," Novin replied, forcing a calm tone. "The council will begin shortly. We have much to discuss." As the comms officer patched through to the other fleet commanders, Novin turned to Graves. "Prepare the briefing. This meeting has to be decisive. If we can't get the Palgrians to commit, then our chances of victory are slim." Graves nodded. "Understood. I'll have the data ready." The room quieted as the remaining fleet commanders entered the virtual council chamber. Thaler, the Epherian captain, appeared first, his features lined with exhaustion but still brimming with determination. "Admiral Novin," he said, his voice respectful but tinged with anxiety. "We are ready. The Palgrians, are they here?" "Yes," Novin replied, "but I can't predict how this will go. Their involvement is critical, but we may need to offer them more than just survival." Thaler's brow furrowed. They've always been self-interested, but they respect strength. If we present a unified front, perhaps they'll listen. Thyla's image flickered onto the screen, his angular face unreadable. "I will listen," he said, his voice almost a challenge. "But understand this, Admiral Novin. The Palgrians do not commit to battles we do not see the benefit in winning. You must show us why we should risk further losses for your cause." Novin felt a surge of frustration, but he kept it under control. The threat we face is not just humanity's. It's a threat to every living being in the galaxy. We are all at risk of being consumed by whatever force created the singularity. This is no longer about borders, allegiances, or territory. This is about survival. Violet stared at him for a long moment, his eyes narrow slits of calculation. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. Perhaps you speak the truth. But I will need assurances. If we help you, the Palgrians will expect something in return. Something permanent. We do not fight without gain. Novin's heart sank. He had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still stung. Name your terms, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Violet's lips curled into what could almost be called a smile. A new alliance, Admiral, a new power structure. The Palgrians demand a seat of leadership in any future coalition. A place of influence that matches our might. We will not be sidelined. Thaler growled under his breath. That's a heavy price, Xylith. Perhaps, Xylith replied, but it is the only price we are willing to pay. Novin took a deep breath, staring at the Palgrian ambassador. This was the moment of truth. We are not here for power, Xylith. We are here to survive. If you want influence, fine. But you must prove that you are committed to the survival of the galaxy, not just your own people. We can't afford division. Not now. Violet's eyes glinted with something unreadable. We shall see, Admiral. You will have your answer soon enough. The transmission ended abruptly, and the screen went dark. That went well, Thaler said dryly, his frustration clear. We'll see, Novin replied. He had expected resistance, but now, more than ever, he realized just how fragile their alliance was. The Palgrians' terms were a heavy burden to bear, and the Aetherians were not likely to accept them easily. The next steps would be crucial. Prepare for a decision, Novin said, his voice steel. If the Palgrians demand too much, we'll have to move forward without them. But if they agree, then we must unite. For the galaxy. As the fleet moved closer to the decision that would determine their future, Novin could feel the storm gathering on the horizon. It wasn't just the enemy that was threatening their survival anymore. It was the very alliances they had worked so hard to form. Would they stand together, or would their differences tear them apart? Only time would tell. The council chamber was heavy with anticipation as the remaining fleet commanders, alongside Ambassador Xylith of the Palgrians, gathered once again. The tension was palpable. Every eye was on Novin as he stood at the head of the room, his thoughts racing. The decision they faced could mean the difference between a united front against the enemy or the collapse of everything they had fought for. The Palgrian ambassador was the first to speak after a long silence. His eyes, like twin slits of ice, locked onto Novin. We have considered your words, Admiral. The Palgrians are not fools. We understand the gravity of this conflict, but we will not fight for free. Novin took a deep breath, holding his composure despite the pressure. I understand, but if we don't stand together now, there will be no future for any of us. Your people will survive, but not in the way you envision. The galaxy will fall into chaos, and no one will be left to rule. Violet's gaze remained unmoving, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps doubt, beneath the surface. You speak of unity, but you ask for something no species has ever agreed upon. Equal leadership among disparate races. That is a dream. Then we will have to make it a reality, Novin said, his voice firm. If you join this coalition, it will be as equals, but only if we succeed. We can't afford selfishness. If we fail, there will be no ruling at all. Just ashes. Feller, the Aetherian leader, spoke up. He's right. We all face the same threat. If you truly want to lead, prove it by acting for the common good, not for personal gain. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, as though the very stars outside had paused to listen. Violet's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Novin thought the Palgrians might walk away. But then, in an unexpected turn, Xylith inclined his head. We agree, the Palgrian ambassador said, his voice cold but decisive. "We will stand with you, for now." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a sense of hope flickered in the room. But Novan knew this agreement was fragile. One misstep, one broken promise, and it could all unravel. "Good," Novan said. "Now we must prepare. The enemy is closing in on us. We will not have much time to regroup, but we will fight together, or we will die together. We'll make our stand here, at the heart of the galaxy, where our combined fleets can hold the line." Graves, who had been monitoring the tactical readouts, spoke up. "Admiral, we've detected movement. A massive fleet is approaching our position, far larger than any force we've faced before. They're not here for negotiation." The room fell into a tense hush as the weight of the situation hit everyone in the chamber. The enemy was not here to talk. They were here to finish what they had started. "We don't have the luxury of time," Novan said, his voice steady, but his mind racing. "Prepare for battle. All ships, form up around the Elysium. We fight to win, or we don't fight at all." As the fleet commanders began issuing orders, Novan moved to the bridge's viewport, gazing out at the darkness beyond. The stars were distant pinpricks of light, but now they seemed almost mocking in their silence. The enemy, whoever they were, had waited long enough. Now they would face humanity's wrath. Graves approached him, her face set with determination. "Admiral, we've got a window. We need to make a choice. We can either try to strike at their leadership, take down the command ship, or we can fortify our position and hold the line." Novan looked at her, his decision clear. "We don't have enough time to wait. We go on the offensive. Strike fast, hit their command ship. If we can take out their leader, we'll break their morale. We have no other choice." "Understood," Graves said, her voice resolute. With the final plan in place, the fleet ships powered up, their weapons charging. The Elysium and its allies formed a protective barrier as they prepared to face the oncoming storm. The enemy fleet loomed large on the sensors, a terrifying mass of ships that stretched across the horizon. The battlefield would be chaos, every second would matter. As the enemy drew closer, Novan stood tall at the center of the command deck, his voice steady as he gave the final order. "This is it, for Earth, for the galaxy, for the future. We fight now." The massive enemy fleet surged forward, its dark ships swallowing the stars. The Elysium and its allies powered toward the enemy with a ferocity born of desperation. The air crackled with energy as the first volleys of fire erupted from both sides. Laser beams streaked through space, striking shields and tearing through hulls. Explosions rippled through the cold vacuum, the sound of warfare echoing in the hearts of those fighting for survival. Novan watched from the command center, his heart racing as he guided his fleet through the chaos. The battle was fierce, the stakes higher than ever before. But even as the enemy pressed forward with overwhelming force, Novan knew one thing for certain: humanity, with its allies, would not go down without a fight. This was their final stand. This was their chance to survive, to protect everything they held dear, and they would give everything to win. The eternal light had come, and it would burn brighter than ever.